Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. My name is Graham Canals. I'm the Executive Director of the California State Association of Counties. We're the organization that represents the all county government before the state legislature, the administration, and the federal government. Today, we're here to talk about the critically important topic of wildfire preparedness, recovery, response, and liability. The governor and legislative leadership have called a special conference committee together with members of the legislature to focus on this topic in the remaining weeks of this legislative session. And we are here today to respond to this action, offering up our partnership to focus on how we can work together to become better prepared and more resilient to the increased frequency and severity of wildfire disasters. But we want to be very clear. We will not stand for any changes to current liability laws that let investor-owned utilities off the hook while local government and the citizens that we represent are left holding the bag. Last month, CAL FIRE issued a report stating that the causes of 16 fires from the October 2017 fire siege were caused by utility equipment. 11 of these cases have been forwarded to district attorneys' offices for further review. We believe it is highly inappropriate for the legislature to consider changes to liability laws without first fully examining safety requirements and standards, including those not met in recent fires. We must not rush to a solution, but must first fully understand these devastating events, what caused them, and whether existing law and standards were met. And although we stand here this morning in Sonoma County in front of one of the thousands of lost homes, these fires have also ravaged other communities. We're now going to hear from supervisors and survivors impacted by these events in Northern California, and we'll be open for questions afterwards. I'd like to invite up Napa County Supervisor Diane Dillon to share her thoughts.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you all for joining us today. Our key point, our communities are still in recovery. Now is not the time to change the liability laws specifically for utilities. Our liability laws level the playing field, bringing multi-million-dollar companies to the table with victims to settle for damages from negligence. We must have these laws in place to bring the parties to the table rather than battling. Now is not the time to change the rules.
Good morning, my name is Phil Demery. I am a 2017 Tubbs fire survivor. I'm also the former Public Works Director here in Sonoma County, past president of the County Engineers Association of California, and past president of the National Association of County Engineers. During my career, I was involved in many different emergency responses for local agencies. And so when I got that call early in the morning on October 9th, 2017, I pretty much knew what to pack and what to take out of the house in the evacuation. But in my mind, I really wasn't worried. I thought I was going to be back in a few hours. See, I lived about a mile from a fire station with a 750,000 gallon water tank. My house was built in 2004. It was stucco sided, concrete tile roof. Although we had an open space behind us, our backyard was almost all concrete. We had a large pool. Boy, was I wrong. Start to finish in 1 hour, our house completely burnt to the ground. We were the only house on our block to burn. Ever since that day, it's been an emotional roller coaster. Starting the very next morning when we were trying to find a place to live on a temporary basis. The County of Sonoma had a housing shortage prior to the fire. You cannot believe the competition for housing when you add 5,300 more families to the mix. After a couple of failed attempts, we finally landed on a house in Sonoma about 45 minutes away from here, and we feel very fortunate. You don't really understand, if you're not a fire survivor, the immense amount of time it takes in dealing with insurance companies, the mortgage bank, utility companies, and contractors, if you could actually find a contractor that can rebuild your house. I cannot imagine if you were a family with children living at home and having jobs to attend, how you can dedicate that kind of time to this effort. One of the most difficult things that fire survivors have had to do with the insurance company is to document all their personal losses. Now, all a fire survivor wants to do is put the fire behind them, to have a future, to be excited about the future. But day in and day out, it's always the same thing. What you lost, documenting what you lost. And my wife and I, for instance, we spent 8 months in this effort on a daily basis. We had over 2,000 line items on a spreadsheet of things we've lost. We finally threw up our hands and said, we can't do this anymore. This is too painful. And we've been able to negotiate a settlement with our insurance company. At the end, you kind of realize that it's just things. Most things can be replaced, but there are things that can't be replaced. Our family history, the kids growing up, senior pictures, wedding albums, heirlooms from deceased relatives, photos and artwork from world travel. The other problem, of course, is the tremendous financial burden it's placed on fire survivors. You may have had a policy that covered your house pre-existing the value prior to a fire. That's not going to be near enough money to rebuild your house in light of the competition for skilled labor and building materials. In our case, our house to rebuild is twice that of the value of the house, pre-burn. So here we are, we're fortunate that we had good insurance. The vast majority of individuals were underinsured. They did not have the right amount of insurance. And as a result, many have had to leave. Some more will have to leave because they lack the resources to be able to rebuild. Changing our utility liability laws will have a direct impact on our ability to stay in our community and to rebuild our lives. We can't let that happen. Climate change did not ignite the fires. The wind did not ignite the fires. Dry conditions did not ignite the fires. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Georgianne Krosky, and I am the 3rd District Supervisor in Mendocino County. My county was also ravaged by wildfire this last year. And the Redwood Valley fire, it burned thousands of acres in Redwood Valley, Potter Valley, and Pine Mountain. And it destroyed 543 structures and killed 9 people in my community. At the height of the evacuations, there were over 7,600 people in mandatory evacuation and more than 2,000 in evacuation warnings. And this included over 100 small animals in shelters, along with over 350 horses and livestock that were also at the evacuation shelter. And I, much like the gentleman before me, evacuated thinking I would only be out for a couple of days, not expecting a 9-day evacuation. But thankfully I did have a house to return to, and I did have a house that I could open up for fire victims to come and stay with me until they were able to move back into their house a couple of weeks ago. And we strongly believe that our current laws level the playing field. They bring multi-million-dollar utility companies to the table with victims to settle for damages. We must have these laws in place to bring parties to the table rather than battling in court. This is especially important for small communities like mine. Of the 58 counties, 20 have populations less than Mendocino, even though we often consider us a small community here. CAL FIRE issued a report stating that 16 of the fires from October of 2017 in Mendocino, Humboldt, Butte, Nevada, Sonoma, Lake, and Napa counties, they were caused by electric power distribution lines, conductors, and the failure of power poles. We believe it is highly inappropriate for the legislature to suggest changes to the liability laws without first fully examining safety and the requirements and standards. Even if changes to our liability laws are not retroactive, we strongly believe that any prospective changes to the liability laws will have a lasting impact on the current and future events and significantly impact our community's ability to make us whole again. Thank you.
Everybody, my name is James Gore. I'm chair of the Board of Supervisors here in Sonoma County. This is the Vice Mayor of Santa Rosa, Chris Rogers, and here's Brad Sherwood. Brad and Brandy, this is their house behind us. And I say that because you might not see something right now, but you're gonna see some ground being broken here pretty soon, right?
Couple weeks.
Yeah. Brad just looked at us when we walked up and he said, "Welcome to my home and welcome to Chelsea Way." You know, he also said, you know, Brandy would be here, but she's on a work trip in Texas. And that just is kind of this crazy realization that you have to continue on with your lives, continue your business, get things done at the same time that you're trying to rebuild your house for your kids and take care of your lot and do what's right. So you are why we're here, man. You're here for resilience, we're here. So a round of applause for this guy right here, please. You know, welcome to the rebuild. As the Vice Mayor and I were talking about recently, we have a lot of houses going up. It's great to smell this sawdust and hear these hammers going. But at the same time, we all know that there's this issue looming before us. We can keep talking about the fact that right behind us on October 8th and 9th, a wildfire took basically 4 hours to go from Napa, come all the way through our area, slice over 6 lanes of freeway, and go into the interior of Santa Rosa, right? This is the new normal. Climate change is impacting these things. But at the same time, we have some requests, i.e. demands. Number one, full transparency and a seat at the table, right? All of these disasters, the mantra is they start local and end local, okay? Number two, pump the brakes. Don't go around changing liability for the last 20, 30, 50, 100 years without having a full discussion with us and with local authorities and others on how this can happen. And number three is let's not make enemies, let's make partners. Because the reality is there's a lot of anecdote running around. Not here to talk about PG&E being a bad company or being a good company or San Diego Gas and Electric or Edison. What we're talking about is accountability. We as a government have accountability for what we have to do every minute of every day. The IOUs and the utilities have to be in the same position. So any talk about whether it's inverse condemnation or other things, we need to be there. We need to have people like Chris and also Brad represented proudly, and we need to work hand in glove with the governor's office and our legislative representatives to get this done right. They're in it to do the right thing. We need to be at the table helping them get there. So I want to thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to the Vice Mayor to talk about it from the city perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The supervisor is absolutely correct. We have about 2/3 of our residents have not had a chance to even settle with their insurance companies yet. While we do have about 750 who are in the construction process, far too many people are focused on rebuilding their lives and are not actually able to be at the table at the moment, talking about how this fire has affected them. The California Association of Counties, as well as the California League of Cities, stand united much the same way that the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma has stood united for our constituents and demanded that our people have a seat at the table and that nothing is forced through in the final weeks of session that hasn't been fully vetted, that hasn't had Brad's voice, that hasn't had our constituents' voices at, and make sure that we do this in a collaborative manner, similar to how we've been rebuilding. The liability is an important issue for us to discuss going forward, but in particular for our residents that are affected right now, we need to make sure that they are not impacted as they are trying to find scarce dollars to rebuild their lives and rebuild their homes.
So what's critically important is to recognize how complex these issues really are, the importance of having a thoughtful, deliberative process to work through solutions, to not shift liability to the very communities and fire victims that are trying to rebuild their lives. And to do that takes time. And that's not going to happen in a 6-week flurry at the end of a legislative session. It is imperative that we look at changes on a going forward basis for a system relative to the vegetation management Supervisor Gore was talking about, looking at how to improve our communities and be better prepared on a going forward basis, but we cannot make changes in a vacuum before we have full information. And that requires a far more thoughtful conversation that cannot occur in a 6-week period. So we should be spending time throughout the fall talking about this issue. We should be spending time next year talking about this issue. But we should wait until there's clarity about what came out for all of the fires. We have information from some of them, and the degree to which there is or is not negligence on the part of the utilities. That's a critically important question. And to ensure that as we're going through this, the victims who were trying to rebuild their homes and the communities that they reside in are not put in the position of having to own liability as they're trying to rebuild. Thank you all very much. Folks will be available for additional questions.